So Dockerfile Maven plugin is being used. Dockerfile Maven plugin under the hood uses Docker file. So if you look in your code, there will be application in Connect code. Inside application, there'll be CU Connect or whatever, and then there'll be a folder called Docker. Inside that, there'll be a Docker file. The Docker file will tell what needs to be done. I mean, we'll talk about some of the fundamentals of Dockerfile. I don't want to talk a lot about it now, but the artifact that Maven produces, we can inject it in this Dockerfile using arguments, okay? And we will use Dockerfile does a packaging to produce an image. It produces the image. It takes this image and puts it into remote repository. That's what your Docker image is. When you have your Kubernetes environment over here, you deploy your Docker images as pods inside Kubernetes or OpenShift namespace. Okay, that's what is called pods. Pod contains Docker images. In your world, in your FIS world, you're only using one Docker image per pod. So there will be a Connect AO pod with Connect AO image, but technically pod is a wrapper to have more than one images if you need to. Okay, so that's what a Docker image is. Docker image is like your operating system. I mean, it is not operating system, but it is like operating system, which has everything that you really need to run it. And when we do Docker next time, you'll get to know what it means. Okay, so Docker image is like, if you guys are familiar with cassettes and CDs, you have CDs of Lata Mangeshkar, Kishore Kumar, so on and so forth, right? They will not start playing just by looking at the CD. You have to take the CD and put it inside a CD player, right? So that CD player is a Docker engine. Your Docker is a Docker image. If you want to create an instance of the Docker image, which is called a Docker container, you have to run it inside a Docker engine. Similarly, even when you're using OpenShift, there's a Docker engine basically running in the worker nodes, which allows you to create paths. Okay, let's not get into those details. Let's look at a story from a simple perspective, right? Now, to be able to deploy this Docker image to the pod natively, what you use is you use something called as Kubernetes manifest. Okay, we haven't learned Kubernetes yet, so you will not know what Kubernetes manifest is, which is fine. Kubernetes manifest is nothing but a YAML file. Okay, which will name where your Docker image is, what's the Docker image tag version basically, and then it'll tell I want to deploy it. To deploy it to a specific environment, you use from your local, you use a tool called kubectl. Okay, and the command specifically is kubectl apply or create -f the YAML file. So when you're connected to a specific namespace of Kubernetes or OpenShift, you'll either use, if you're using Kubernetes, you'll use kubectl apply -f. If you're using OpenShift, you can still use kubectl, but OpenShift also has a CLI called OC. So same command, OC apply -f, the YAML file, will create the pod over here. So look very closely to this. What you have is you have a YAML file over here. That YAML file will declare the name of the Docker image, and it will declare the version of the Docker image that you want to deploy. So it is just taking it and deploying it to your environment. Okay. Helm comes into picture because when you have this YAML file, everything is hard coded over there. The name of the Docker image, the tag of the Docker image, everything else, right? If you want to templatize it and use the same template for multiple projects, that is where Helm comes into picture. Helm comes to template, to create template basically. Okay. So if you go to your Helm and go to any of this manifest what the Helm has, you would see the same manifest what you would use for Kubernetes. The only thing is there are placeholders which allows you to write templates. And now how do you replace the placeholders in a template? That's when you use a file called values.yaml. That can be named anything you want to. So when we do a Helm upgrade, you can pass a -f values.yaml file, what file you need. Okay. So far, why I had to tell you this whole story is when we create base chart, when we create base charts, the base chart is tied to a specific piece of Docker image. A Docker image is for a specific repository, correct? So every single project, you'll have a base chart. That means you can take this base chart and deploy it, and that particular project would get deployed in Kubernetes. Okay. Are you there with me so far, Jyoti?
Yeah, yes, Samir.
Okay. Next, what we do is we have created three different microservices. Each one of them is an application. Okay. If you deploy it, technically, they should be deployable, but in our world, they're not deployable. Next, what we do is we create a buffet tray. We say in this buffet tray, we want all of this to be tied together. There's a file called requirements.yaml where we can declare which are the base chart that this particular guy is using. And this one, we call it as umbrella chart. It's an umbrella because, or you can even call it as a bill of material. That's because instead of deploying each one of them individually, you can technically now take this one umbrella chart and deploy it. It'll deploy all the 3 pods for you. Okay, that's what your umbrella chart is. Now, this particular umbrella chart can be deployed to a dev environment, can be deployed into a test environment, can be deployed into production environment. So every time you do a deployment, I told you if you want to change the templates, what is the file name that you have to pass? Values.yaml, right? So technically, you can just take this umbrella chart, pass it a different values.yaml file, and you'll be able to deploy to any environment. But instead of going through that hack, what we did is we created another chart that basically imports this chart, umbrella chart. Okay, and there's a values.yaml file for that particular environment. So now you have an environment called, let's say, dev. You can create similarly for prod, UAT, so on and so forth. So when you deploy this, you don't have to explicitly tell what values needs to be used because it already has the value, it already has the certificates, and anything that differs by environment is stored over here. So you just take this chart and deploy it. You don't worry about values and all of that stuff. Is it clear so far now? Did you already know all this, or is this more information?
I know up to this, I know.
Sorry, Jyoti, what was that?
Yeah, I know this information, Samir. Up to here, I know. Yes.
Sure. Yeah, so when we get into Helm, we will get to the details of it, how to create the Helm charts, how to templatize it, so on and so forth, right? We'll take a look at it. But we are very far away from there. Before that, we have to complete the continuous integration. Then we'll come to deployment. Okay, any questions? Anybody, any questions?